Members, the chair lays out House Bill 748. There is a committee substitute. The chair lays out the committee substitute to House Bill 748. Members, I'm honored to present this important bill before the committee this morning, House Bill 748, which we're naming Trey's Law. You're going to get to know Trey and his story from his sister Elizabeth here in just a few minutes. Members, this bill is meant to address what I believe is a major problem under current law. Under current law, there is no specific provision that explicitly prohibits the use of non-disclosure agreements or similar confidentiality agreements and clauses as part of a civil suit settlement agreement with victims of sexual abuse. And as a result, many victims feel trapped, silenced, and feel like justice was never truly served. By allowing these type of agreements, often horrific and systemic abuse is hidden from the public eye, resulting in few consequences for the perpetrators and often allowing for more people to be harmed by unknowingly interacting with a bad actor who's hidden behind a non-disclosure agreement. The committee substitute to House Bill 748 is very simple. It explicitly prohibits these type of agreements and civil settlement agreements, rendering them void and unenforceable under Texas law, to the extent that they would prevent a victim from speaking out about an act of sexual abuse or any facts related to those acts to any person or third party. The bill does, in its current form, allow for an agreement of the parties to keep other details or terms of a settlement, such as the amount or the payment terms, confidential. The substitute before you broadens the applicability of the legislation by defining, quote, an act of sexual abuse, close quote, to include not only all aspects of childhood sexual abuse, but also sexual assault, aggravated sexual assault, and human trafficking violations, regardless of the age of the victim. And of course, as I just mentioned, the substitute also officially names this act Trey's Law. Members, we have some incredible witnesses here with us today, some of the most courageous, bravest individuals I've ever had the blessing of knowing, and we welcome them to their Texas Capitol today to share their stories. The bottom line is, members, we, all of us, this legislature, we have a duty to protect victims. No victim who chooses to tell their story or to speak out about their experience should ever be silenced. We have, over the years, over the past few sessions, done a lot of really great work standing with survivors and with victims, victors, as I like to call them, and against their perpetrators. And to me, it's clear. You either stand with victims or you stand with the people who've harmed them. There is no middle ground. So it's time for Texans to pick a side. And as for me and this committee, and I believe this legislature, we are going to boldly and firmly and strongly stand with victims and doing away with non-disclosure agreements in the state of Texas once and for all, making it against the public policy of this state to ever enter into one, I believe is the next step forward in this important fight. I want to thank, of course, the witnesses who we're looking forward to hearing from today. Vice Chair Johnson has been so wonderful and courageous in this fight. Other legislators have as well, including our colleague, Representative Mitch Little, who's joining us on the dais today. Vice Chair Johnson and Representative Little's and others' fingerprints are all over this bill. And this has been strategically and very thoughtfully written and drafted. And I want to ask Vice Chair Johnson and then Representative Little to share a few words with the committee.
Thank you, Chairman. I also want to thank you for your leadership on this issue over the past few cycles. You have been brave and courageous to let everybody know how personal this is to you and your family, and I thank you very much for your leadership. I will say to those that are here, it's been a long time coming. And I, for one, am honored that we will have an opportunity to hear from you. And I know that as we hear from you, that the video, audio waves are going to reach thousands of survivors who have not had the courage and have not had the strength to sit up here. And with each of you, they are going to see a glimmer of hope. And with each of you, the state of Texas is going to know what we've done wrong and what you need from us to be better, to be more, and to ensure that what has happened to you and your family and your friends is truly something of the past. And so thank you for your courageousness, your vulnerability, and we are grateful to be able to have an opportunity to hear you today. Chairman?
Thank you.
And
Thank
that's
you, Vice
because
Chair
of you.
Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's an honor to work with you on this. Representative Little, it's great to have you on the dais today, and your role as a legislator and as a skilled attorney, and would love to have you share some words with the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Leach. It is extremely generous of you and your committee to invite me here today. I've had the pleasure of working with you on this bill. You've been very receptive and kind in considering potential amendments to the bill, and I think your committee sub does a very good job of laying out and addressing the problem. I want to just provide briefly the perspective of a practitioner who has worked on child sex abuse cases involving churches, summer camps, schools, ministries. I've been in the room when these cases have been settled. Some of the child sex abuse cases I've worked on have been horrific. One involving a 12-year-old girl at our church summer camp who was molested by a pastor. And oftentimes the victim of sexual abuse at the hands of a pastor, family friend, a teacher is in a mediation room, and they're faced with the decision of whether to settle their case to receive some sum of money that is going to help them with their lifetime of therapy and counseling, to help them heal, to compensate them for the soul murder, which is really what sex abuse is, of having undergone that. And typically a condition that is presented by defendants in cases like these is a non-disclosure or confidentiality agreement so that victim can really never share their story outside of either a law enforcement context or under a subpoena when compelled to do so. I think we as a state need to decide that those types of agreements are void as against public policy. And I will cite to you a pretty significant example. So we're joined, I saw in the gallery this morning, Robert Downen is here. Robert Downen wrote a piece for the Houston Chronicle about the Southern Baptist Convention and the, I'll call it, prolific environment of abuse that exists not only in the Southern Baptist Convention, but throughout other denominations as well. And one of the reasons that it exists so pervasively is the culture of silence that really surrounds the issue. It's you hire a bad employee, they do something horrible, oh no, that's terrible, let's settle the claim, there's a non-disclosure agreement, and then that pastor, teacher, volunteer moves on to another church and they continue their acts of abuse. So the incomplete flow of information in our society about who the abusers are and what they have done in some ways perpetuates the abuse against people throughout, not only throughout Texas, but through other parts of the country as well. And so when I've been in those rooms with plaintiffs and I've been presented with those non-disclosure agreements, I've said, we're not going to sign it. And we'll agree to keep the terms of our settlement confidential, or how much you paid or however you want to pay. We'll keep that confidential. But I want to empower my client to be able to tell his or her story as they become adults so that they can heal and so that other people don't suffer the same fate at the hands of the same people. I understand Ms. Clemishire is here to testify as well about what she endured at the hands of Robert Morris, who I saw was just recently taken into custody yesterday or the day before. I am here to tell you that I know for a fact that in large organizations like churches and parachurch ministries, schools, summer camps, oftentimes the board of directors or board of trustees or board of elders is aware of the abuse and participates in concealing it. And I think we as a legislature need to decide that we're not going to aid in the concealment of that information. Oftentimes, as a lawyer, it's very easy for me to say, well, I'll negotiate my way out of it. But not everyone has a lawyer. Not everyone can negotiate their way out of it. And, I can remember times where I was sitting in court or mediation going, well, I don't get to make those decisions about what's void as against public policy. Well, now I do, and the rest of us do as well. And so I thank you for your generosity, Chairman Leach, in allowing me to participate, and I look forward to hearing what these fine citizens have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Little. Well said. And it's not generosity. Your input and expertise is invaluable, and you're welcome here at this committee on this bill or any others going forward. And appreciate your thoughts this morning. And you know what is happening with these NDAs? It is truly a re-traumatization of a victim when you tell them that they cannot tell their story, when under the threat of them losing whatever settlement or whatever care has been promised to them, they are unable to talk about what happened to them. It is truly, in many cases, just as traumatic as the original abuse itself. And we're going to, I'm very confident, pass this law this session and make it, as you said, Representative Little, against the public policy of this state to even request an NDA. And so with that, members, I'm happy to take questions if you have any. If not, let's get to our witnesses. The chair calls Cindy Clemshire, Elizabeth Phillips, Catherine Robb. Let's start with the three of you. Good morning. It's great to see you again. Welcome back to the Capitol. And the committee looks forward to hearing from you this morning. Elizabeth, let's start with you, and then we'll go to Cindy and then Catherine. Is that okay? Okay. The chair recognizes Elizabeth Phillips. I have you here testifying on behalf of yourself for House Bill 748. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All right, go ahead.
As you said, I'm Elizabeth Phillips. I'm from Dallas, Texas, District 108, where I grew up and where I still live today. Thank you to this committee, and a special thank you to Chairman Leach for authoring this bill to prohibit the misuse of NDAs against child sexual abuse and trafficking victims, and for naming it after my late brother, Trey Carlock. It honors him and my family, our loss, and the countless survivors of child sexual abuse like him who didn't survive. I'm going to read my testimony because this has been a long time coming. I've been working towards this day for 5 years, and I want to get through my testimony in the allotted time. Thank you.
Time limit doesn't apply to this bill.
Thank you.
Take your time.
Trey was my little brother who was silenced to his grave by Kanakuk Ministries, a summer camp and global enterprise based in Southwest Missouri. Trey endured a decade of grooming and child sexual abuse by their popular director, Pete Newman, followed by a re-traumatizing civil litigation process that ended with a restrictive NDA. Sadly, a lot of truth dies with people because of NDAs, and that only protects bad actors, which is contrary to public interest. To me, that is the point of Trey's law and this hearing today: public safety, protecting children. I've actually learned more about the extent of my brother's abuse in his death than I knew in his life due to the NDA he was under. Trey told a therapist, "They will always control me and I'll never be free," before he died by suicide in August 2019. He hesitated even to tell his story in confidential therapeutic settings for fear that Kanakuk would come after him again like they did an earlier John Doe. Now that I know what I know and have caught my breath, I'm trying to be a voice for Trey and the countless other victims of childhood crimes who are suffering in the shadows due to NDAs that restrict them from speaking in settings like this. Since my family was public about Trey's Kanakuk camp's abuse in his Dallas Morning News obituary, we've heard from so many other victim families with similar stories. 17 suicides and lives wrecked beyond belief all over the world. Kanakuk survivors assembled an advocacy website called Facts About Kanakuk, which launched in 2021 and has since received continuous tips with hundreds of abuse allegations against more than 65 unique perpetrators associated with Kanakuk, dating from 1958 to today. Texas is one of Kanakuk's largest markets. The same family that has been at the helm of Kanakuk throughout these decades While victims have been lawfully hushed by NDAs, Kanakuk and its insurers demanded, behind closed doors, with attorneys who would gaslight and intimidate victims in depositions that led my brother to a psychotic break. My brother had many layers to his journey of injustice. First, he was groomed and abused from age 7 to 17 by a serial sex offender who was sentenced to 3 life terms in 2010. Trey was 20 years old when Pete went to prison. Then Trey was forced by the civil statute of limitations in Texas to file his civil case against Kanakuk before the age of 23, while he was just trying to finish college and also process unimaginable trauma amidst a Christian culture applauding Kanakuk and hailing its CEO, Joe White, as a spiritual hero. Trey's civil case ended with a settlement that included a restrictive NDA, making Kanakuk and its representatives another perpetrator of abuse in Trey's tragic and unnecessary demise. Institutional abuse on top of sexual abuse. I've seen firsthand how NDAs and child sexual abuse settlements conceal decades of abuse for the sake of personal and institutional protection. Until very recently, when some brave survivors broke their NDAs to speak with investigative journalists, dozens of Kanakuk victims believed that they were the only ones who had been abused there because the story barely reached the media. I've spoken with many men and women who spent 20 plus years believing that they were the only child abused at that summer camp or one of its affiliated entities. An Oklahoma woman in her 70s who was sexually assaulted the very first year Kanakuk opened its doors to girls shared her story of feeling crazy her entire life until she stumbled upon an article about 3 years ago that exposed the evils of Kanakuk. I was the first person she'd ever told, besides her husband. Delayed disclosure is normal for victims of child sexual abuse, if they ever disclose at all. So, when the floodgates opened and survivors coalesced around a petition asking Kanakuk to release victims from their NDAs, we garnered nearly 30,000 signatures. Kanakuk's response was a public statement and blatant lie that they do not use NDAs. Those of us who knew better called that out, so then they said they do use NDAs, but it's only at the request of the victims. Survivors called out that lie, and Kanakuk changed their tune again, admitting in an open letter from CEO and board chair Joe White that they do use NDAs, but it's their insurance company that makes them do it. And in order to avoid repercussions, victims should not disclose their settlement terms. Kanakuk won't come clean, and we're not giving them any more chances. We're going to change the law. The law on NDAs must be clarified because we cannot trust institutions to do the right thing. It's no exaggeration for me to claim this as a matter of life and death. I think we know what child sexual abuse does to a person's life, does to a kid. And I think we also know how healing happens. It's by sharing your story in safe places, finding support and solidarity. That's the whole basis of talk therapy and the Alcoholics Anonymous model, for example. When you take someone's voice away, especially a child's, you take away their most linear path to healing. Trey's law should be a welcomed and minimum measure of justice so that future victims of childhood crimes do not have my brother's outcome. There's a quote that says, "Shame dies when stories are told in safe places." Tennessee made itself safer in 2018 when they became the first U.S. state to pass a bill prohibiting NDAs in civil child sexual abuse settlements. And 18 states, along with U.S. Congress, have clarified the NDA issue for adult survivors of sexual assault. It's time we do the same for children, and Texas can be a leader on this. NDAs are for trade secrets, not trauma secrets. I get asked a lot since becoming more public about this issue on a national level. Why would your brother sign an NDA? Was he physically forced? Well, actually, when you've been abused and gaslighted and re-traumatized by intimidating lawyers on both sides who want to close a case, you're exhausted just trying to function. And then opposing counsel offers you 7 figures if you just sign on the dotted line. You need to be able to pay for treatment and a lifetime of care. You want to move on and hopefully heal. So you accept the payout, but it feels like a bribe. My brother referred to his settlement as blood money, as if he had betrayed his own soul to keep Kanakuk's secrets, and it killed him. So, I'm here before this committee to ask you to please remember Trey. I'm asking the Texas legislature to pass Trey's law this session as an urgent matter of public safety. I'm proud to be Trey's sister, and I hope Texas will be proud of Trey's law. Thank you, and I'm prepared to take questions.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Members, any questions? Yeah. The chair calls Cindy Clemshire. Cindy, I have you here registered on behalf of yourself, testifying for House Bill 748. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Welcome back in front of our committee and to the Capitol.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you for having me back again. I don't know that any of us really need to say anything after that, but thank you for taking the time to hear my story. I've jotted down a few things and trying to stay on track with this.
Take your time.
Okay, as you already know, I am Cindy Clemshire. I'm from Oklahoma. I grew up in a small town, Hominy, in Osage County. I am a survivor of child sexual abuse that occurred, that occurred between 1982 and 1987 when I was 12 to 17 years old. I was abused by Robert Morris, then a traveling evangelist who was married with one child, who went on to become the founding pastor of Gateway Church, one of the largest mega churches in America here in Texas. As I stated, the abuse started when I was 12 years old on Christmas night in 1982 while Robert Morris was staying in my family's home. The first time he made the premeditated decision to violate and defile my purity, he told me, and I quote, "You can never tell anyone because it will ruin everything." This abuse continued over and over and over until I finally told someone in 1987 at the age of 17. When I did finally tell someone, it seemed as though Robert Morris was right. It ruined everything. Friendships ended. Marriages of mutual family friends ended. My relationships with my parents, my siblings, friends, and others took a shift. And at 17 years old in 1987, I felt like as if it was all my fault. As I began the lifelong journey to sort through these emotional challenges, my life seemed to attract more shame, while Robert's attracted fame. Through decades of counseling off and on, seminars, books, and conversations with friends and family, I have found my way to understanding child sexual abuse, forgiveness, and healing. Part of that journey also involved a pursuit of financial restitution from Robert in 2007 at the age of 37, 20 years after I first told someone. My attorney at the time, Gittner Drummond, who is now the AG of Oklahoma, asked for $50,000 to cover past and future counseling. Robert Morris's attorney responded with a letter accusing an innocent 12-year-old Cindy of pursuing Robert, making Robert sound like the victim. The letter also offered a $25,000 settlement as long as I would sign an NDA, which I refused. That was 18 years ago. Because I refused to sign that document, giving up the right to freely speak about events in my life, last Wednesday, March 12th of 2025, almost 43 years after my abuse began, Robert Morris was indicted in Oklahoma on 5 counts of lewd acts with a child, which each carry 20 years in prison. And he turned himself in to authorities just 2 days ago in Osage County in Oklahoma. Because I refused to sign an NDA, my abuser is finally being held accountable for the horrific crimes he committed against me as a child. Because I refused to sign the NDA at the age of 37, I am able to sit here at the age of 55 and share my story and be the voice for so many people who don't have the courage to come forward in hopes that I can help them.
Cindy, thank you. Chair calls Catherine Robb. Catherine, I have you here on behalf of yourself and the Children's Justice Campaign testifying for House Bill 748. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Thank you for hearing my testimony today. I am the National Director of the Children's Justice Campaign. I have testified in over 35 states for any type of child protection legislation. But I'm also here as a survivor. I was abused by a family member starting when I was about age 7, and it ended when I was about 14.
Thank you.
So I do bring the voice of a survivor to all of my testimonies across the country. And I understand, not just based on the research and the data that I testify on, but I understand anecdotally and I understand personally that when victims are sexually abused as children, as we know the data tells us, that it takes years, decades, if not a lifetime, to come forward because they are silenced. They are silenced by shame and fear and intimidation and threats. So to allow victims, when they finally come forward, to have a voice, to again silence them in protecting bad actors and institutions, to me, is simply outrageous. I speak to survivors all over the country and all over the world. Almost 100 a month I speak to survivors. But what's most painful is when I get calls from family members telling the story that Elizabeth just shared here about the loss of a family member who could no longer bear the burden and the pain of keeping this secret, and then again to be tied up in an NDA. And I want to make it clear to this committee that yes, survivors like myself and those that have spoken here, it's important for our healing that our voice is not once again snatched from us. It's important for our healing. It's important for other survivors to see that yes, you can do this. You can come forward. But I'd say that almost equally important, if not more important, and I say this as a reasonable woman, not just as an attorney and an expert in this field, but also as a mother of 5 and a recent grandmother, that NDAs protect bad actors. They protect the perpetrator, right? Secrets don't help children, right? So I think of this in a forward way as well, not just that it's helping survivors have their voice and have their healing, but the children of Texas will be safer because these secrets are not covered up in an NDA. And as Elizabeth said earlier, these are not typical tort cases. These are not contract cases or slip and fall cases or trade secrets or confidential secrets in a business. That's not what we're talking about here. Let's be really clear. We are talking about covering up secrets about the rape of children, the sodomy of children, the sexual assault of children. And if we allow our bodies of leaders like you here to allow them to be covered up, then the children of Texas are no longer safe. Because I have never seen a secret that benefits a child. And it is time, and I thank you, Chairman Leach and Vice Chair Johnson. I thank you for supporting this legislation, because it will indeed make the children of Texas safer. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thanks to each of you for your courageous testimony. Vice Chair Johnson.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank y'all. I'm equally having this kind of overwhelming moment as I'm looking at the three of you as you testify. The heads are nodding in the background in the audience. And you can see that there's this relief that this conversation is beginning. But I'm also feeling some kind of way about the seal behind me and where we are here. And what is frustrating to me is that it seems that a contractual provision of an NDA has been used by individuals to protect their bottom line. The complete opposite of see something, say something. And it is daunting that it has taken literally decades and generations of silence and suffering to finally get this conversation to the seal. And I want to thank you, Elizabeth, because many of us have a big sister. But I can't think of a stronger big sister or a more committed big sister or the greatest act of love that you have shown to Trey. And I'm sorry to ask this question, but I do want to ask. What has it been like for you? Because you mentioned you found out more about Trey after his passing than you did in his life. Tell us what it has meant to realize that your brother did not have the ability to come to his big sister because a bunch of lawyers or a bunch of organizations worried about their bottom line continued to silence the suffering from his family.
Thank you for the question, Vice Chair Johnson, and for your championship of this type of legislation over many sessions. It has been a very painful journey to come forward with my family story, with Trey's story. Mm-hmm. However, if we can protect one child from Trey's suffering that I had a front row seat to, mm-hmm. Seeing him in and out of treatment centers where he was scared even in those settings to talk about his abuse, late night phone calls about suicidality, addiction issues. He tried everything to heal, but ultimately was legally silenced to his grave. And now that I know what I know, this is an atrocious practice that's become a standard practice in personal injury law, and it's time to end it because we don't want anyone else to have Trey's outcome. And what I'll say is that today's opportunity to testify before this committee and to meet with legislators who actually care has given my family's pain some purpose. And I hope it doesn't end here. Thank you.
I can tell you personally, I think you were instrumental in some of the media outlets paying attention to some of the legislation that's been going on here. And months ago, back at home, somebody that I'd known for decades, and I never would have suspected, grabbed me by the arm and said, "Can I talk to you?" And he told me that he was a victim and had not yet dealt with the issue. And so everything that you are doing, every voice that you are lifting, you are creating that light at the end of the tunnel for people who have suffered in silence for decades.
That makes it all worth it. Thank you.
Ms. Clemshire, I had a chance to see you come speak at a SNAP conference almost a year ago now.
August of last year.
For those that didn't get to see it, you had this incredible visual of a piece of luggage. And it caught me in the way that you drug that luggage across the stage. And with that visual, can you tell the people that are listening to you today what you meant by carrying that luggage?
Yes, as I talked about just a few minutes ago, the shame that my life continued to attract, that was what I decided to use to show people. Like when I left home at 18 to go to college, I carried with me shame that I really couldn't even begin to understand. And as I journeyed through life, I just continued to fill that luggage, that suitcase with shame. You know, whether it was divorce, pregnancy out of wedlock. I often call myself one of the lucky ones because it wasn't a family member, it wasn't my father, and I didn't become addicted to drugs. You know, I had my other share of trouble and choices that I recently heard someone say many times, we know what someone's character is, but their choices aren't aligning with that, and it's very confusing. And that was validated when my story went public last summer, when my high school English teacher and speech teacher, who I'm still friends with today, she called me and she said, I always wondered what had happened to you because your life took a path that none of us anticipated and didn't look like who we knew you to be and how you were raised. And that is what that luggage represented, was all the choices that didn't align with my character and who I am. Just more and more shame added to what was started when I was 12 years old.
And you're in a unique position because you hear about sexual abuse taking someone's innocence.
Yes.
Representative Little has talked about it, the abuse that the offender causes is absolutely criminal.
Yes.
But Representative Little also mentioned the fact that many times where it's coming from somebody out of an organization or an entity that has the ability to recruit vulnerable populations, especially kids,
Yes.
that entity and that organization needs to take those perpetrators equally seriously, or the manner in which they come in contact with them. You've also highlighted another significant point of what I'm almost going to call this evolution. You talked about, you disclosed facts at the age of 17.
Mm-hmm.
You again, at the age of 37, found some strength again to try to get into the court system, and now here you are in your early 50s. Can you explain to us, as a policy-making legislative body, about that roller coaster of evolution for victims and when they have the strength or ability to maybe come forward or not?
Yes. I think that's exactly what it is, a roller coaster, because at 17, when I told, I did feel as though I was the one at fault, even to the extent that Robert Morris's wife, Debbie, called to tell me she forgave me. So still trying to
Just
mature.
let's clarify that. The wife forgave you for being a 12-year-old who
Yes.
her husband was having sex with, right?
Correct.
How did you take that? What did that do to you?
Well, at 17 and then being family friends, I was thankful because I felt like I had done something wrong. And I had been treated, as though I had done something wrong by Robert, like making me the guilty one or a part of something that I chose when I knew nothing. I mean, 82 was a very different time when we didn't carry computers around in our hands and we had 6 channels maybe on our televisions. So innocence was very different than it is now most of the time. But that journey from 17 to 37, it wasn't until, even with years of counseling, that I could accept the term abuse. I was 35, the first time I truly accepted and believed that he abused me, that it was criminal, and I understood what grooming was. And that changed the course of my journey to more healing, and there's anger, of course, involved in that. But I was having children. You know, I have 3 sons. They currently range from 17 to 32, and I also am a grandmother of 3. And I think that for a woman, I can only speak for myself and being a woman, but that journey involves protecting your children, and how you do that, and how much, I mean, feeling more shame if you talk about it publicly. We did privately go to people throughout the last however many decades, 3.5 decades, sharing with people in the pulpit in churches across the country about what he did to me and my family, in hopes that they would take him out of the pulpit, because we knew legally there was really nothing we could do at that, you know, the time of it. So it takes a lifetime, as Elizabeth said, to process and heal, but just to have the courage to come forward and speak openly to the world, I never would have been ready until now.
Thank you. This silence of shame, the structural manner in which it is put together, and we are here talking about the NDA today as a policy-making body, as part of an organization, as an individual victim. Can you give us a sense? What is the gravity of the problem in Texas, and how necessary is it for us as a public policy that people have the opportunity to tell these stories and, for lack of a better phrase, warn others about the perpetrators that are in this state?
Thank you for that question. Right now, we know in the most recent data that about 1 in 8 children will be sexually assaulted before they're 18. If that's not an epidemic, I don't know what is. It affects all children, regardless of their racial background, socioeconomic status, their political beliefs, whatever it may be. All children are affected. And I think the other thing that's really important to mention is that the burden of this epidemic is on Texas and the taxpayers, because these folks, myself included as a survivor, we need help. Now, I was lucky. I was a basketball junkie, and basketball literally saved my life. I can say that now that it's March Madness, right? But it literally saved my life. Not others are so lucky, right? But I needed help. You need social services. It burdens that system. It burdens the educational system, because survivors, again, take this path, this sudden right or left turn, and have behavioral issues, educational issues, focus issues, memory issues, the whole neurobiological effect of trauma. I could go on that for a long time. So my point is that it burdens all the different systems of the state of Texas, and taxpayers are paying for this. It is about time that we shift the burden away from the state and taxpayers to the bad guys, right? And I think that the very nature of abuse silences the victims. Again, we're not talking about slip and fall cases. We're not talking about fender benders or anything like that. And this bill is narrow. This is for any opponents out there. This is a very narrow bill. This is just for child sexual abuse claims, right?
The committee sub expands that.
Yeah.
The committee substitute does
That's
expand
right.
that to all
That's
cases.
right. I stand corrected. But still narrow, generally narrow. It's not saying all settlement cases, all confidential agreements. You know, it is your power and your, quite frankly, your wisdom, right, that will make the children of Texas safer, that will give voice and healing to survivors, because we're living in an epidemic. And most of these perpetrators, certainly everyone at this table, all of our experiences, is someone that the victim knows. For me, it was a family member. knows very well, right? So it's really hard to sort of parse out in terms of our systems that can help with this. This will make children safer, undoubtedly.
Yeah, thank you. I want to mention a couple things before we move on to our next panel of witnesses very, very quickly. I do think it's important to stop here and just to note, and hopefully all agree, that for victims that for whatever reason may not want to speak out, that may want to hold their story to themselves, we fully support that, and our law supports that, and there is no pressure or guilt or shame that should be felt by any of those victims whatsoever. But for those who feel now or going forward that they are silenced by any law on the books in the state of Texas, today we are going to drive a stake in the ground that says that is not the case, not anymore, not now, not going forward. So for those who want to speak out, this is a bill that empowers you. For those who choose not to, this bill empowers you as well. Secondly, Cindy, when I hear you talk about how Robert Morris so egregiously attempted to silence you, I'm reminded of a clip I saw of his from a sermon that was around the same time when he was trying to silence you and prevent you from telling your story in exchange for blood money. He was on the pulpit at Gateway talking about his past indiscretions, and communicating and telling the story to his congregation in a sermon from the pulpit about how he had an inappropriate relationship with a lady, making it sound like it was consensual, and that it was an impropriety, and that it was an affair from long ago. Then the letter that they came out with this past summer, where they said that he had been involved in, I don't remember the exact words, I don't have it in front of me, indiscretions with a quote, I think it was young lady. Didn't mention that you were 12.
Relationships.
Let's all remember, Cindy was 12 in 1982. 12. It's the same age my wife was when her abuse started. And so how horrifying that must have been. While he was attempting to silence you, he was telling his own story from the pulpit.
And
We're going to go
people
on to our
were
next
allowing
panel of
it.
witnesses, and we're up against the clock here. We're going to do something in a few minutes that we don't typically do around here, but except in remarkable and special circumstances. We're going to hear from our next panel of witnesses, and then before we go to the floor, members, just so you have a heads up, we're going to vote this bill out of the committee and send this bill to the House floor this morning. I think that it's important that we do so before we go to the House floor. And so thank you each for being here. I'm going to call our next panel of witnesses so we can make sure that we get done with our business before the floor. The chair calls Curtis Garrison, Christina Green, Jennifer Allman, and Joseph Cleveland.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Chairman present.
Yes. Oh, the chair will show Chairman Dutton as present.
Could I ask a question?
Of course.
If it's a continuous act, part of which occurs during the childhood and part of which occurs during the adulthood, does this affect that?
So this bill only affects, this bill is not relating to statutes of limitations. There are other bills
Right.
dealing with that. This bill
Right.
just affects an agreement whereby it would affect both. The original version of the bill only applied to childhood sexual abuse and assault. The bill now applies to all cases. So if an NDA has been entered into, it would be void as
applies to
against.
all cases now?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, good, thank you.
Okay. I am going to put the timer back up. I apologize, but we do have to be sensitive to the clock. So the chair calls Joseph Cleveland. Joseph, I have you here on behalf of yourself. I registered for the bill. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Good morning, committee members. Thank you for letting me testify today. I'm going to read my testimony because it's easier. My name is Joseph Cleveland. I live in Huntsville, Texas. In 2004, at the age of 15, I was introduced to a man who was a pedophile. This was just after my parents got divorced and after growing up with a severely abusive father. At that time, I was desperate for any form of male leadership in my life. So needless to say, I was an easy victim for him. This man began grooming me and would eventually begin molesting me. This happened once or twice a month for the rest of my high school. Little did I know, this man was working alongside a college ministry called Chi Alpha within the Assemblies of God for at least 2 decades and had already molested other boys, for which he had served 90 days in an Alaska jail. Pastors in our ministry tried to convince students as I grew up to go to college, many of whom were also victims, to write letters of lenience on behalf of the abuser to the judge. And you would think after graduating high school and turning 18 that I would have moved on and left. After all, why would anybody continue to let themselves get abused as an adult? Unfortunately, that's not how grooming or the mind of a victim works, so I'm sad to say that the abuse continued. When I was abused in 2005, the statute of limitations in Texas was that I had until the age of 23 to come forward. At the age of 23, I was still being molested by this man. For a significant amount of time, the leadership in the Assemblies of God, which was the denomination that I was a part of, had been my whole life, knew that this man was a registered sex offender and continued to allow him to work within the scope of the ministry. For nearly 20 years, I told no one, not even my wife. And myself and 5 friends, I'm getting ahead of myself. I was one of the first victims to come publicly forward in 2023. Myself and 5 friends, some of whom were even still pastors in the Assemblies of God, started making calls to friends, fearing other men had been abused, and we had heard dozens of stories of abuse and started to try to help the over 40 victims that we found to get help, seek justice, and just to heal. We watched in horror as NDAs were used to insulate organizational leadership to cover themselves, using the NDAs as a fog of ignorance and hiding behind it. Because of this, the justice has not been served. Since then, the Assemblies of God has tried to dismiss valid civil claims of negligence, sideline victims like myself in the investigation process, and has even sneakily tried to get minor victims to sign NDAs. I'll also add that I'm a high school teacher here in Texas, and every year, to reiterate from the witnesses earlier, I have heard stories of sexual harassment and sexual abuse from students. My wife and I have a rule in our house with our kids: no secrets. Last night, I was talking to my 8-year-old daughter, and I explained to her in 8-year-old language the process of NDAs and child sexual abuse, because it's a heavy topic for an 8-year-old. And she said in her 8-year-old language, "But if you keep it secret, doesn't the bad person keep hurting children?" Her 8-year-old brain automatically understood that. There's a quote from Supreme Court Justice a long time ago, Louis Brandeis, saying, "Sunlight is the best disinfectant," referring to the power of transparency and openness to expose and combat corruption and wrongdoing. My request is that we pass Trey's Law, as this bill would allow accountability and justice to take place, and it will not allow organizations such as the Assemblies of God and leaders to plead agnosticism in the face of these unspeakable crimes, and it will bring truth and light to the situations in desperate need of truth and light. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cleveland. Very sorry to hear about your story, but we appreciate your
Thank you, sir.
courageous testimony today. Thank you, members. The chair calls Curtis Garrison. Curtis, I have you here on behalf of yourself and on behalf of SOS CSA.
Yes, sir. That's Speak Out to Stop Child Sexual Abuse.
Speak Out to Stop Child Sexual Abuse, and you're registered for House Bill 748. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
First, I want to say thank you for everything that's been said from you guys, because I've never heard anything like that. Not the support that you're doing today. It's unbelievable. Okay, I'm Curtis Garrison, and I'm a child sexual abuse survivor. For my adopted dad as a toddler, that I grew up to know that I had seen my adopted siblings and several foster children being sexually abused. And then I was abused in my Boy Scouts troop from age 12 to 15 in the 1980s. I am now 55 years old, and I've been fighting for justice my whole life. NDAs are laws that protect predators. I am one of the 82,209 BSA bankruptcy claimants. It's been over 5 years since the Boy Scouts of America filed for bankruptcy, February 18th, 2020. And we're losing approximately 100 claimants a month, waiting and dying for justice. The trauma, divorces, job loss, high blood pressure, blood sugar, they're losing eyesight, physical ailments they're dying by suicide. The carnage is costing our society unbelievable amounts, and people see these people walking around, have no clue what they're suffering. Silence is further abuse. Silence is violence. Silence is deadly. It took over 4 decades for me to work around NDAs and statute of limitations to even have a chance to be heard. Unfortunately, the bankruptcy process is another way to try to silence us. The BSA has NDAs with claimants that's settled out of court. They have NDAs with their employees, especially when they leave or they'll lose their pension plans and benefits. My perpetrator was a known perpetrator that was before my troop and after, and the Boy Scouts of America did not warn anyone. Since their beginning, on average, thousands of children were sexually abused every year for decades, and a known perpetrator was reported to the headquarters every other day, every year for decades. Tens of thousands of these perpetrators in their files, and they're still hiding them. They're redacted or not known in what they've released. News coverage started with them since the 1920s. Like New York Times had an article in the 1930s about thousands of perpetrators known and hidden because of NDAs and their policies of not reporting. Protected perpetrators continue to sexually abuse children. They die before they're held accountable, and survivors don't get their chance for justice. Survivors have the heavy weight of shame for thinking they're to blame for allowing this abuse to continue, especially when they see that others have been abused after not being able to stop these perpetrators. Justice delayed is justice denied. If laws don't provide accountability, then these laws have to change. I don't even know how it's possible that these laws exist to hide a crime that's so vile and disgusting and harmful. It costs us for our whole lives, and everybody is suffering from our trauma and struggle. I mean, I'm not married and don't have any kids, okay? That's a loss for whatever my family tree could have been to contribute. Thank you for helping child sexual abuse survivors be heard.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Garrison. Again, I'm sorry about your story as well, but tremendous act of courage to be here in front of us today, and we're grateful for that. The chair calls Christina Green. Christina, I have you here on behalf of the Children's Advocacy Centers of Texas testifying for the bill. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, go ahead.
Christina Green, Chief Advancement and External Relations Officer with the Children's Advocacy Centers of Texas, here in support of House Bill 748. And I represent the 70 children's advocacy centers across the state that serve children in all of your districts, 60,000 children a year, and the majority of those are child sexual abuse cases. And I'm so grateful for the brave survivors that you've heard from today and for their stories, because that's how we propel progress. That's how we propel justice, and that's how we keep our communities and our children safe. Unfortunately, though, these stories that you have heard are not unique. We have over 60,000 children every year walking into the doors of our children's advocacy centers that are experiencing crime, the majority of those crimes being child sexual abuse. And their stories are very similar. They have the same threads around grooming, around secrecy, around people they know and love and trust that have perpetrated these acts of violence against them. There's been some conversation about the scope, and that 1 in 8 number is a national number in Texas based on new data that we've worked with the Department of State Health Services and the CDC to gather. It's 1 in 6. With 7.5 million children in the state, this is not something that we have the option of sitting on. We have to take action. And this is one of a suite of pieces of legislation before this body, many of which you all have authored on this dais, to keep our kids safe. We need to make sure also that we are not just responding, because we cannot investigate and prosecute our way out of this. We have to prevent it. And one of the main ways we prevent this is preventing secrets and allowing our victims to actively speak out about their abuse, both so that they can attain safety, justice, and healing, but also we can keep future children safe, because we know that the dynamics, the perpetration of these acts of violence against children are by perpetrators that will offend again on the same victim and with multiple victims after that. So I'm grateful for this body. I'm grateful for the conversation today. This is a marked change. It is.
Yeah.
And I feel it deeply, having worked in this area for over a decade and a half. And I want to shout this for the rooftops for our 70 children's advocacy centers that are out there in the field doing the work with these survivors and brave child victims and their families every day. Because the one thing that they say to us as their state association, as the leader up here to advocate for them and on their behalf and on behalf of these children, is how do we stop the funnel of kids coming in our centers? We want to put ourselves out of business. We don't want the state to have to continue to increase funding and policy measures to help making sure children are getting to us and we're able to serve them after they've already experienced abuse. And this is a huge step in that direction. So thank you for your advocacy, and thank you for your continued investment in responding to, but also preventing this.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina. Thanks for your work. The chair calls Jennifer Allman. Jennifer, I have you here on behalf of the Texas Catholic Conference of Bishops, registered for House Bill 748. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Go ahead.
My name is Jennifer Allman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Texas Catholic Conference of Bishops, and I'm testifying in support of House Bill 748. I, too, want to thank the previous witnesses, all of the survivors who have have used a great amount of courage and tenacity to tell their stories and the stories of their loved ones. The Texas Catholic bishops are committed to using all efforts to end the evil of sexual abuse. Over the past 24 years, the reforms within the Catholic Church have strengthened communities in which the Church is present. Prohibiting non-disclosure clauses in civil settlement agreements involving sexual abuse claims recognizes the value of transparency. However, such a prohibition should respect survivors' right to privacy when the inclusion of such clauses is at the option of the survivor. So I want to thank Chairman Leach for the comments that you made about those who really don't want their story told. The Catholic Church does not enter into settlements in sexual abuse cases which require confidentiality agreements for the Church to keep quiet. We do allow survivors to say that the Church cannot disclose their name. We do disclose the name of the credibly accused priest, however, or clergy. And because we publish those names, sometimes that's why survivors ask us to sign an NDA protecting their confidentiality so that they are not connected to the case. We believe this bill empowers survivors. The only concern we might have about the bill is how the retroactiveness at the end of the bill will work. But regardless of how that provision works, it is the policy and practice of the Church in Texas not to use non-disclosure agreements of this type. So we still support the bill. I want to thank you, Chairman Leach and Vice Chair Johnson, for your efforts to shine a light on childhood sexual abuse to encourage transparency and healing. It's methods like these, as well as all of the bills before the legislature on background check, closing loopholes, that will help us to further prevent abuse and to ensure that our culture is a culture of see something, say something, and is a culture of telling. That is what we want to instill, and we think this bill helps to do that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Members, any questions? Yes, Representative Flores.
I just want to say thank you to this panel and to the previous panel for coming forward and helping this committee and the legislature remove a very horrific tool from a toolbox for predators and perpetrators. So I thank you, Chairman, for bringing this bill up.
Thank you, Representative Flores. Members, any other questions for the panel? Okay, thank you each for being here. Thank you, gentlemen, for your courage. Elizabeth, you could sit back up here. I just want you to have a front row seat to this. Members, is there any objection to the adoption of the committee substitute for House Bill 748? Seeing none, the substitute is adopted. Representative Johnson, Vice Chair Johnson, moves that House Bill 748, as substituted, Trey's Law, be reported to the full House with the recommendation that it do pass and be printed. The clerk will call the roll.
Leach,
Aye.
Johnson,
Yes.
Dutton, Moody, Landgraf, Schofield, Gonzalez. Flores. Hayes. LaHood. Dyson.
There being 10 ayes and 0 nays, the motion prevails, and Trey's Law will be reported to the full House with the recommendation that it do pass and be printed. Thank you and congratulations. Members, the chair moves that the committee stand in recess until final adjournment, recess of the House, or during bill referral if permission is granted. Is there objection? Seeing none, hearing none, the motion prevails and the committee stands in recess.